Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna De Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube, and the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my home, welcome to the office, and welcome to Table Talk, which is the first Table Talk of 2025. So we didn't have one on New Year's Eve, so here we are on the 7th. It is 2025. We're kicking off the year in a big way. And joining us tonight for our discussion of He-Man is James Bacon.
Well, hello.
Welcome, James.
Thank you, Heath. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Great to see everybody in the chat. PH is here. Tomocrat is here, I see. And BGD was talking about this is going to be a great discussion. So, yeah, we had mentioned wanting to talk about this last year, a few months ago.
Yes.
And so I thought now would be a good time to kick this off. So, first of all, you want to tell them who you are, James? And I'm going to bring up your channel right now.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm an internet somebody now, right?
Yeah.
I'll get there. Give me a second. Just scramble my
There
brain.
we go. Better with Bacon. He is the host of
Better with Bacon YouTube channel. That's what it's called. I'll get there. So it's just it's my YouTube channel, getting my ideas out there. Sometimes it's a collaborative effort with Sable Phoenix and Doug Burton and a friend of mine, Blaze and Jax and Ben, and we all do different things. We talk about role-playing games. We talk about movies. Large amount of inspiration taken from Heath and the way that he does his own conversations. It's a pretty well singular channel at the moment, but I don't know if we get popular, maybe we'll branch out and do the movie one and the video game one and the role-playing game one. I have no idea what direction it's going in, but I just want to get my ideas out there, and it's been fun. And if anyone wants to stop on by, I'd love to have you.
And the Sarah Pig Rancher just showed up. Hey, Sable.
Hey, Sable.
All right, so we had a little bit of a discussion on what we wanted to talk about, and in what order and things like that.
Yes.
And we're going to talk mainly about the original He-Man. I mean, we can go in different directions as it's relevant, but we thought that we should talk. I mean, there's been a lot of different iterations and stuff, but we wanted to talk about the original He-Man, the 1980s cartoon, at least the original show. There's stuff before that. I mean, we might end up talking about that. But what is your experience with He-Man?
I was an 80s kid through and through. So I loved Transformers. I loved He-Man. I loved all those television, G.I. Joe. There's a lot of other 80s, lesser known 80s brands, but there's the pretty big ones. And He-Man is something that I return to quite frequently. It is eminently rewatchable. More so than Transformers. In fact, I don't know if you've tried to go back and watch any of those cartoons from the 80s. Like G.I. Joe is workable. You can get through it. Transformers is a very difficult watch.
I have not tried to rewatch Transformers. The only one that I've tried to rewatch is He-Man. I've rewatched
and He-Man is so eminently rewatchable. It's the message, the themes, they're timeless. The characters are incredible. They're so vivid. They're so well realized. And I think that a great deal of its staying power comes from the camp, right? Like there's always some sort of you kind of almost get the feeling that He-Man is he doesn't really take this seriously, right? He's yeah, he's the most powerful man in the universe, and yeah, he has to stop Skeletor, but this is kind of a joke to him. And so it's got the humor plays, and even still, there are moments when it takes itself seriously. It's just, I guess what I'm getting at is that there's such a variety. And the way that it takes itself seriously when it needs to, and the way that it is very self-deprecating when it wants to be, it's just a joy. It's a joy. I absolutely love the show.
I think probably He-Man was my first encounter with anything sci-fi or fantasy. Because He-Man blends.
Okay.
So I think it was, and I wish I had the opportunity to try to find these pictures again. But I've got, The Hobbit, we said is read to you, as a family tradition. So I remember having the Hobbit read to me, but that was much later. I mean, I actually remember that. I don't remember my introduction to He-Man. It was that early. I know that there are pictures that I had that I think was a birthday. I think I got He-Man, Skeletor, and the green vehicle that He-Man could ride, not the green battle cat, but it was one of his that he
the ripcord one. It had the face on the front and the two wheels.
Yes,
man, I wish I could remember the name. I'm gonna look it up right now. So give me a second.
Find it.
Yeah,
green ripcord He-Man.
It might be something as simple as the Ripper. Yep, Road Ripper. That's it.
Okay, I didn't know that was his name, but that's definitely it. So that's it. But, can I bring this up? Okay, so there, so that's it. I remember I got He-Man, Skeletor, Road Ripper.
Yeah,
I guess he actually doesn't lay down on that. He lays down on something that looks like that in the cartoon, and this Road Ripper. And so there are pictures of those, of me with those toys on a Christmas. I believe it was a birthday. So. And I don't remember that. So, so before there, I remember the introduction to The Hobbit, but, I can't actually remember a time when there wasn't He-Man because it was introduced earlier than my memories.
That's great. I would likely be in that same camp. It seems like He-Man was a part of my childhood, just like Transformers was. G.I. Joe was, but to a lesser degree. I can remember first getting into G.I. Joe. He-Man and Transformers was always there. They were always there. It's not He-Man, but I don't know if you remember in the 80s, they had these like fitted sheets for beds, but they had tents. So you would put like these plastic struts in them, and it had a zipper door and everything. And it was a fitted sheet for a bed. It just also had a tent built on top of it. And I had a Transformers one, and I would lay there in bed just looking at the different Transformers and naming them. Absolutely loved it. They were always there. And He-Man was too, but I'll say that He-Man comes back more throughout my life than Transformers does. Transformers are cool. Robots are cool. Robots that transform into cars are cool. Cars are cool. Jets are cool. But He-Man, there's just something about it that has just a very strong draw. Really, really like it. Hey, PH Arbex, you are 100% right. I was a Visionaries guy. I still am a Visionaries guy. I love that line. I love holograms in general. There's also Supernaturals. That was a line from, I think it was Tonka. It was either Taika or Tonka. I want to say it was Tonka. Supernaturals, same deal. They had those holograms. Oh, absolute. I love those things. I love those things.
I didn't know. I was like, Titterpig Rancher said Beast Wars Transformers, on the other hand, is highly rewatchable.
Yes,
especially the episodes where Dino. But I don't know Beast Wars. I think I recall that name, but that's not something that I watched.
It was Transformers, what later came to be called Generation 1, which was the original cartoon. Then they tried to do Generation 2, where they kind of changed the colors of the toys, and they like kind of sort of rebroadcast original episodes, but with some updates. And then there was a little bit of a lull, and then we eventually got Beast Wars, and that was, I think it was like 90s, like early to mid 90s. But the stories were just so well written. The characters were incredibly dynamic. Like there were several characters that just, they would change sides, right? Like there was the one who started off as a Maximal and went Predacon, later on went Predacon, and then there were Predacons that would come over to be Maximals. They would change factions for all types of different reasons. Some of them love and relationships. Some of them a sense of honor that they were missing on the current faction that they were involved with. Very involved, complicated stories, very satisfying, and imminently rewatchable.
I remember. So I remember. So I got. I don't remember getting those, but I remember those. My He-Man was the He-Man whose chest would dent.
I think that's battle armor. It was
battle armor He-Man. Yeah.
3 times. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. That's right. So we
loved that one, and I loved the Skeletor as well. The Skeletor had that like neon green and pink bat in his chest, and He-Man had the red. I think it was just like sort of a re-envisioned, like a stylized H, because he had that H on his chest.
Right.
Sometimes it was a cross, depending on the era of toy that you bought. And so there was a variation on that, but I loved that one too. That was
battle armor He-Man was my He-Man.
Yeah.
And then I remember getting to I got some of the other toys from somebody else. I'm not sure who it was, but like who was getting rid of them or something like that. And I got this gigantic tin of toys. Like I remember like having to wrap my arms around it to carry it, and it was all these different He-Man action figures.
So great.
So I had that. I had Castle Grayskull. I had Snake Mountain, and it was always.
I had Snake Mountain. I did not. I don't think. Well, technically, my brother had Castle Grayskull, so I guess we had them both. But Snake Mountain was my jam.
Well, it was a big deal to get out Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, put all the right weapons to all the right action figures.
Yeah, good luck.
and fight that out. So I did have the things that I did not have that I always wanted was a friend. I guess he wasn't a friend, he was an acquaintance or something. I remember going over to his house and playing He-Man with him. Maybe it was like a work acquaintance with my father, or a work connection. And his son had the battle ram and the sky sled, like that toy, and I loved that from the cartoon. And I thought, oh, hey, BGD, we're just talking about you. I loved that. And I thought, man, this is amazing. But I never got one of those myself.
I had a battle ram. What I didn't have was the attack track or the Dragon Walker. And I would have killed for either of them. They were motorized. So like the Dragon Walker had 2 feet and the head would slide forward to the I guess the front foot, and then it had this mechanism where it would pick up the back foot, swing it around, and then it would move forward again and pick it up and swing it. So cool. And the attack track was just a fun tank, right? It was bright red with orange and blue treads, and they clickety clacked. It was just awesome.
Right. The attack track attack track toy looked different from the attack track in the cartoon. I mean, a lot of things did.
Yes.
But the Dragon Walker, I believe, appeared in both. And I remember being in the back seat of the car, and my parents asked me, do I want to go see the He-Man movie, or do I want to get a Dragon Walker? I had to make that choice.
What an awful choice.
And I picked at that time to go see the movie. So I went to see the movie. That's why I never got a Dragon Walker. But also, you see action figures behind me on all of my different streams, but I really am not a big collector. I mean, I haven't bought one in forever, but because I never got a Sky Sled.
Oh, that's the Origins line. That's so great.
When I saw this, I was like, I have to get this because I wanted it so badly as a kid and never had this. And I thought this was the coolest of all of the different vehicles. I mean, I loved the Sky Sled, and of course they rode it all the time. And so when it came out, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get this one. So there were a couple of things that when I saw them, there's like marketed perfectly. Like, okay, here it is.
And that line, that Origins line, they are done in the same proportions as the original figures, but they have articulation. They have much better paint, much better soft goods, because toys have come a long, long way since, the 80s. And that line, Origins, it is so incredibly affordable. I think that I was able to get my Air Raider for, I think it was like $10 or something.
The Wind Raider?
Wind Raider. I'm sorry. Yes.
The green one that's right there?
Yep, that one. Yeah, yep. I think I landed it for $10. I think it was maybe on clearance at Target, or it came through the toy store or something. I can't remember exactly how I got it for that price, but it was $10. I'm like, yes, I'm getting it for $10. It's an incredible buy. And that line, Origins, it has been so fun. It's been so fun because there are scores of He-Man characters from the various sagas and shows that are now getting releases in this Origins line as though they were, the original proportions, which is just so fantastic. It's really, really great. And some of those figures are so fun, like Cyclone, one of my favorites. I like the blue guys, right? So I like Skeletor. Cyclone. I like Cyclone. I just like the blue guys. Gar is what the race is called in the series. Garr. I just absolutely love the show, and just, I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to fall all over myself trying to get stuff out of my mouth.
That one is also the one that is that the line that has the robots, Skeletor's robots, because those weren't released originally.
Are we talking about the Horde drones? Hordax? The domed heads? The yellow visors?
No.
Oh, okay, yes.
And I would have killed to have this as a kid. This is one of the ones I was like, I have to buy it, because I would have killed to have had Skeletor's robot knights.
Yeah.
And so here we go. So, and I was finally able to get it.
And even like, because Hordak has his own, I think they're called Horde Troopers or something.
Yeah, the Horde Troopers, right.
Yeah. And similar concept. They're androids, they're disposable. Like you could just, send infinite waves at He-Man and have him just blow them up over and over again. But I never had one when I was a kid. I don't even know if they made them in the original line. But then we got them in, I think it was Masters of the Universe Classics. Now we've gotten them in Origins. We've gotten different colors in Origins. There's a gray one, which is standard. There's the black one, which was like a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. I think there might even be a red one running around somewhere. Like there's so many different, and they're just so cool, like to army build, and they're so affordable. They're just like, Masters of the Universe Classics was not really all that affordable. There was an online only club. You had to buy entire waves at a time. So if there were characters that you didn't want, now Mattel has kind of gone back to doing that, unfortunately, with He-Man. So like the Origins line has moved to Mattel Creations, which is all online, but they're pretty, like, you can get them like they're not difficult to access.
So let's see. Let's go to. So I mean, yeah, I figured we would start off this way, like reminiscing about that. He-Man is obviously, what our experiences were and things like that. But the Titter Pig actually brings us to where I thought we would go. The Titter Pig Rancher for $10 says, "Can we get a brief rundown to start of why He-Man is important to you guys thematically?" So I think this is important because it
great segue.
Why does this resonate? It's exactly that's where we're going. So
it's almost like he knew what we were going to talk about,
right? It's a part of childhood, and like I said, it's a part that comes back. I've rewatched it when I was like, it was actually years ago. I was like, oh my, I had got it on DVD. I was like, I have to rewatch this. Nostalgia is powerful, but He-Man resonated with many fans from a very young age, which makes the toys collectible then and today. That's what makes us want to go back and pick up some of the things from our collection that we never had. I mean, that was my inspiration. So okay, so thematically, James.
Yes.
What is it that He-Man brought?
So when He-Man was first introduced, and as I said, he was, and you said the same thing, he's kind of always been there, right? Outside my door, outside most people's door, from the 70s into the 80s, it was a very, it was a bit of a whirlwind of a time, right? There was a lot of debate. Even, today we have those same debates, but it seemed like it was a burgeoning. It was a very intense sort of explosive start to the difference in personal values. It was at the end of a war, and we were transitioning out of that phase. So it was a very unstable. And as a kid, I wouldn't have known any of that. But you can kind of feel it, even though you don't really know the details of what's going on. So He-Man provides, first of all, He-Man frequently gets like kind of dismissed as a power fantasy, right? Like he's just a male power fantasy. He's just a male power fantasy. That's not really true, right? Like I would say the original Doom game is like the purest that a male power fantasy gets, right? It's literally just demons invade, so you have to kill them, and you just get more and more powerful. You're absolutely unstoppable. It doesn't matter what they throw at you. You're going to end up killing it. That's like a pure kind of power fantasy.
And there's no story in that, is
right?
It?
No, there's no story.
There's a superficial story laid on, but I mean, it's just a first-person shooter.
Yes, yes. But like when you get down to like He-Man or even Dragon Ball Z, right? Because Dragon Ball Z is also a power fantasy, but specifically He-Man, it's power with responsibility. It's not really a power fantasy so much as it is the childhood idealization of reaching adulthood, coming into your own, right? The difference between Adam and He-Man. Adam is reluctant. He is so like annoyingly reluctant. He never wants to, and then he becomes He-Man and he has to sort of step up because that's the responsibility he has in wielding the power. He-Man never kills anyone. And he very frequently solves problems with diplomacy or other means. It's not always just punching something in the face as hard as he can, right? So the power that He-Man has when he says, I have the power, and that's probably where this misinterpretation comes from with regard to it being just your standard power fantasy. He says, I have the power, but that's echoed by children who have seen this thing and adults. Like people came into chat saying I have the power. And that's reflective of this idea that you do. Like you have this self-actualization. You can do these things. You do have the power. You just have to be responsible, right? You have to step up into these roles and sort of seize the self-empowerment. And I know I'm getting like real philosophical and I'm whatever. That's how I tend to be. And so for me, like thematically, He-Man sort of allowing a child, especially children really latch onto He-Man, allowing the child to sort of begin to have that fantasy of stepping into that adult role and being able to achieve the things they want to achieve by their own power. I really like that's really why I think I constantly return to He-Man, right? I'm 45 years old. He-Man is just as good as it's always been. And there are crossroads that you'll reach in life where you really do have to just be the adult. You just, whether you're dealing with maybe a coworker, maybe a family member, maybe you're just trying to overcome some type of personal demon and you just have to be an adult. And the catchphrase, I have the power, it's everything that you need in those moments to achieve that self-actualization and move forward. And it's so silly to talk about it in the context of an 80s like children's cartoon, but I really, really feel like that's why it has the staying power it has. It's just so incredible. It's just real, right? It's just so incredibly real to everyone.
Let's talk about that phrase, I have the power, because it never really occurred to me as being weird until the latest Netflix adaptation of He-Man, which I did watch. But, I have the power, right? Classic, iconic phrase and whatever. But it never, for whatever reason, I guess it's because it was just with me from the very beginning. Like, that's all like, I have the power. What is the power? But they played on that in the new Netflix He-Man. The like Skeletor, I am looking for the power and the whatever,
Right, capital P.
Right, yes, and in a way that really brought out to me for the first time. Even I don't even think I realized this rewatching it as an adult. But they clearly played up this idea of what is the power? I'm looking for this abstract thing that everybody's after. It's called the power. But in which is bizarre when you think of it that way. But philosophically, you have power to and power over.
Yes.
So when I thought about what is the power, I immediately went to a philosophical stance as well, and which is probably not something they were thinking about when they were creating this 1980s cartoon. And what is it? I got the power and whatever, but power to or power over. And that's a difference between He-Man and Skeletor.
Yes, it is. So He-Man is the mythical hero and Skeletor is his shadow. Skeletor is, well, what if He-Man acquired power for the sake of power? What if he acquired power to a greedy end, to a selfish end? What if it was just to lord over other people? He is the anti-He-Man, which I think a lot of people have forgotten because we have so many different types of anti-He-Man. We have Faker and anti-Eternia He-Man. There's a ton of
and also like anti-Eternia He-Man.
Right. But so like the actual anti-He-Man is Skeletor because he is He-Man's shadow. He exists in those dark places. They both seek that power of self-actualization, but He-Man does so with a thoughtful mind and a very helpful worldview. And Skeletor does it with a very selfish worldview and a very thoughtless mind. He just wants power for the sake of power.
Well,
and this is one of the major points that I wanted to bring up. It's so awesome that we landed there completely independent of one another. I think that's fantastic.
Well, when He-Man says he has the power, there is, I think, from the child perspective, from the beginning, and they say this in the Gray Skull documentary, which I love, which is on Netflix. It was part of there's the Toys That Made Us. That's a He-Man, and then that also like got expanded into its own standalone documentary with additional footage. I love that, and I watched it a lot for inspiration. But because there is the powerlessness of being a child. Okay, there's you got to do what your parents say. I mean, there's only so much you can do anyway.
Oh yeah, you are not a protagonist as a child. Things happen to you. You don't make them happen.
Right. And so now that's the children's kind of power. I have the power. I can go and do something. But when He-Man says I have the power, he's talking about power to protect my friends.
Yes.
The power to save other people, the power to stop evil, or the power to stop some kind of injustice.
And sometimes it's the power to resolve a conflict peacefully. Sometimes it's the power to enact a compromise. So like the power to, with regard to He-Man, it can be anything, but it's usually, I would say always, in fact, not even usually, it is always a very positive power. It's a very helpful power, regardless of who he happens to be, in the vicinity of at any given moment.
But whereas Skeletor is clearly power over, he wants the power over Eternia, the power to subjugate people, the power to enslave them, or the power over them, which is enslavement. And that fits so well.
It does.
It's one of those things that comes up. It's like I'm sure they were not thinking about that. But when we talk about archetypes and our psychology and things like that, and things that appear, that seems to be something at a psychological level.
I agree.
Come up.
I agree. Yep. He-Man is the hero and he is the warrior. Archetypes, when I mention those, he is the hero and the warrior, and Skeletor is absolutely, undeniably the shadow to He-Man's hero and warrior.
What is the transition? Okay, so we obviously, I mean, I'm highly influenced by the Filmation interpretation of He-Man, which is the cartoon. Yes. I mean, and one of the reasons I actually went back to rewatch all of the cartoons years ago. I've done it. I think I've done it a couple times, at least in the last minute. It's been a while, but I've wanted to rewatch them all. Was because those aired in the day before streaming or anything like that. I mean, I had He-Man episodes that we recorded off of television.
Yep, VHS cassettes.
Right, and so they were VHS cassettes that were in the drawer. So I may have only had 20 He-Man episodes at max, maybe a dozen, and then there were some at the library. We could check them out at the library too. Mm-hmm. But, there were some that I watched over and over and over again because they were available. And then as far as other stories go, I had the mini comics that came in the
action figures.
Right, the action figures, right. And then there were the golden books. I did also have some of we're able to check them out from the library. I remember something called I called them the big He-Man books. They were hardback and they were big and they came from the library, and I had them. And then I did also, and they're here on YouTube. I think some of the visualizations and audio recordings of those golden books. Mm-hmm. But that's all of that was based off the Filmation stuff. From my experience. Okay, there is earlier stuff which I've been able to get access through YouTube. So what is the difference between the early? Because I actually went back to study, like what's the early He-Man stuff, and it's bad.
It's very bad. I think that it didn't really know what it was trying to do. Some of it's fun, most of it's bad, some of it's confusing. A lot of it didn't find its way forward into the Filmation or Funimation show. Is it Funimation? It's Funimation.
Is it Funimation? Okay.
Or is it Filmation? I don't know. It's one of the two. I'm getting them confused. I don't know.
Filmation. It's Filmation.
Filmation. Okay.
It is Filmation.
So Filmation.
Well, hey, Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
Yeah, so but that surprised me that it's like, okay, here is He-Man before he has all the identity, because he came out of the toy, okay, which and so he doesn't have all of this rich background that's added. He's this barbarian guy who has his tribe, and that was okay. That is okay. I mean, you don't know what you're doing. It's okay. We got this barbarian guy. He's Conan-like. He's coming out of a tribe. He's got to protect. Okay, that's okay. But it's not like that was even done well. I mean, you're reading that, and it's not like you're writing, oh man, this is some weird He-Man. He's kind of, but it's such a great story. It's like it's weird He-Man, and it is also not a very good story that you are trying to read.
And it also sort of contributes to the very fraught history of the creation of He-Man, like who actually created He-Man. It's like, well, there was this comic artist who started off doing all of the early stuff that was bad, and then but the concept for the toy line came from this other individual. We don't have to get into all of it, but like it's a very convoluted because He-Man doesn't have the identity that he had from the show in this early work. It's sort of kind of there, right? So he's got longer hair. He's a large man with a loincloth and a sword, but even like,
and they say he's the most powerful warrior in his tribe.
Right,
You know?
but not like there's no real, if I recall correctly, there's no real mysticism or magic beyond the green goddess who ends like later on they end up giving her they end up sort of writing that into Teela's character. When I say later on, I mean after the Filmation series, after, you know, even after like New Adventures of He-Man. So like we get to 20X, and I think that's when the whole Green Goddess Teela connection begins to be made. But yeah, it's good to know about for the history of He-Man and where he comes from. But largely not essential, right? It's not essential. If you're a He-Man fan and you want to take a look at the history of the character, then you go all the way back to this kind of stuff. But like, it's not, the stories aren't great. It's not really mythic. It's just some barbarian man walking around punching things in the face. It's not like the characters aren't even really all that interesting. I think the most interesting we get is Granomir. I think Granomir is Filmation, the big dragon guy.
Well, no, I think so. I think so. Yeah, I have not encountered early Granomir. I could be wrong.
Okay. So Granomir, but like, because I was just gonna. Well, then in that case, since Granomir's not there, I think the most interesting character is the Green Goddess. Like,
I think so too.
Yeah, she's like otherworldly and. Go ahead. Sorry.
I got her. She's one of the reasons that they came out. I guess that's the Origins line too. The recolor. Like I was gonna make a custom action figure of her. But then, of course, they came out with her, and you can just buy it. And so I got one of her for that reason. That it's a real interesting, yes, arguably the most interesting thing that goes back to that got kind of dropped, right? That's not there.
Yeah, it's like she just evaporates. She's no longer there. Like there's the Sorceress, which is an equally as interesting character, but the Green Goddess, there's just something about that expression of that character that I find incredibly interesting. And so it's very temporal and very ethereal, and it doesn't stick around for very long.
But then when Filmation took over, they had the creative rights, right? They're like, okay, just take this, do this, and they produced something very special.
Very special, yes.
And through two seasons of He-Man, which was a lot of episodes. It's not not today's seasons. And then also through She-Ra, of course, you know, when He-Man.
Arguably, it's better than He-Man.
And arguably, She-Ra is better than He-Man. And they say
really refined the formula.
Right. Really they knew what they were doing. They say that. They're like, by the time we got to She-Ra, we had 2 years of practice.
Yes.
You know, but by doing He-Man to go into She-Ra.
In fact, my favorite He-Man episode is, just to give chat maybe some episodes to go look at, is Horde Prime Takes a Holiday. It is an episode where Horde Prime takes a holiday, and he comes to Hordak and he says, hey, I'm taking my family to this vacation planet, because of course the most evil guy in the universe is just going to go to a spa in a hot spring with his wife and kid. So that's what he ends up doing. And he says, okay, Hordak, you have control of my flagship. If anything happens to it when I get back, or if anything has happened to it when I get back, I'm going to absolutely destroy you. And so it's it's a story of Skeletor, like Skeletor, who knows Horde Prime is going on vacation, shows up and just completely messes with absolutely everything. Now, obviously, like, he has a goal. He's trying to take over Etheria. He's trying to, bombard the planet with a cannon or something like that. And He-Man and She-Ra end up stopping him. But I think it was like climbing a chain that had anchored it to the planet. They just kind of go. It's this thousands of miles long chain. And they're like, whatever, we'll get up there. But it's just it is typical He-Man, it's typical She-Ra, and it's typical Skeletor, and it's typical Hordak, and it's just a really great watch. I love Skeletor because of even as how evil he is and how much of He-Man's shadow he plays the part. He's still absolutely comic relief. He's absolutely comic relief, and I just love that about him. I love that. Like there are like minutes long videos on YouTube of just the insults that he just rattles off of people. They're so funny. They're so funny.
When we're on the subject of Skeletor, then some of my favorite episodes of He-Man, by and large, are the early episodes.
Okay, yeah.
When Skeletor is much less comic relief.
Yes, much more serious tone.
He is much evil. More serious tone in the early dozen episodes, 8 to dozens. Because I mean, eventually they had to figure out what to do with him. Because like how does he lose every time but not be killed? Right? I mean, I know that's the thing. And then of course, like the problem with power is a much later episode, which is great.
That's an excellent episode.
I really love the early episodes, and I think it's because of the more serious Skeletor that he's taken seriously as the Lord of Destruction. Yes, He-Man's shadow. Yeah, I guess that. And he is definitely that in the early episodes. And I think that's why those are some of my favorites.
I find that unsurprising that those would be
for me favorites. that would be
yes. I find that unsurprising, but they're excellent episodes.
My favorite episode, or at least I always remembered as a kid. I guess I got to see it once when it was on TV or something. That's another experience that children today don't have. Like, okay, if you saw like one, if you're watching on TV, you might see one episode of He-Man, and then you might never see it again.
Like this. Yes. Or you might miss an episode that everyone's talking about at school, or there's so many,
and you just can't see
different experiences. Yep.
But I remember seeing an episode, and that was actually my motivation for watching it the first time through. When I said, oh my God, they're He-Man DVDs, I'm going to get these and watch them through, because I had remembered an episode as a kid, and it was just like, I just remember like stills from it. And I remember He-Man being on a tower with a woman, and I remember him bending this bar. Now that's not a lot to go on. You're like, there's an episode where He-Man like takes this bar and he bends it into like that could be any episode. But he was on this tower with a woman, and then he was bending this bar because she was playing with him. And that had stuck with me forever. And I think I only saw that episode once. But then I started watching from the beginning, and it's like episode 5. It's the she-demon of Phantos.
Ah, okay.
And it's one of my favorite, and it became one of my favorite episodes. I was like, oh my God, this is a great episode. It's the one where they've got the queen on the moon of Eternia.
His mom, the queen, Marlena?
No. The queen,
different. Okay.
She's queen of the moon. So there's the
woman, I got
queen of the moon. So she's out there, and she is sending. It has to do with like the supply of the Eternian War, because she provides some metal to Man-at-Arms in his workshops that supply the Eternian heroes, and they make their weapons out of it. And of course, Skeletor is trying to intercept this. It's the only episode that has Strong Arm in it. And that's actually why I ended up getting Strong Arm, the action figure, because he was only ever shown in this.
Which became your favorite episode.
Which became my favorite episode,
that's
right?
Really cool.
And and James Eatock, when he did the overview of it, I think kind of did this episode because he actually broke the main rule of commentating, which is like stay with the action, and he went way off course when he was commentating this episode, because he said that he didn't like it, and he thought that this episode was one of the worst He-Man episodes because He-Man is so action oriented that he's punching down things, whatever, that they're going on an attack mission. they're like going on the special forces raid up to Phantos. But that it had this supposed history, which I really appreciate too. That's like He-Man used to go up to this moon, Phantos, and hang out with this queen. And that scene, Skeletor Skeletor does. He's got the queen bewitched at some point, and he transposes his image with He-Man, so that when she sees He-Man, she sees Skeletor. When she sees Skeletor, she sees He-Man. But we know that He-Man, not Prince Adam, but He-Man would sometimes go up to this moon to hang out with this queen, and it's basically a BDSM story, which I didn't pick up on as a kid. But they're up there on this tower, like this is what had happened in flashback. And like He-Man's up there, of course, in his loincloth or whatever, and she's leaning on the tower, and he's got this beam, which is the scene that I remembered, like this big eye beam, and he like bends it for her, and she's laughing, and he tosses it aside. And then she uses her magic and wraps him up in chains. And then He-Man, does the flex or whatever and bursts out of all the chains, and she laughs. Like, that's what He-Man was going on. Like, when He-Man has a few extra days, that's like Prince Adam turns into He-Man, flies up to Phantos and hangs out with this queen. And then she recalls that, and that's why she puts both of them in chains, knowing that the real He-Man will be able to burst out of the chain. That's how she's able to determine who that is. But I love that episode.
It's so good. That's so good.
But
you could get away with a whole lot back then.
Yeah, there was a lot in there. Skeletor is absolutely serious, in this. He's got, he's the Lord of Destruction. It's brings in the idea of the logistics of the war and Eternia against him. It's got this BDSM subtext, to it. That's the kind of thing that I like.
Well, again,
necessarily the BDSM subtext, but that was very serious. It was taken very seriously, and so I was surprised when like James Eatock was saying this is probably the worst of the He-Man episodes. I was like, no way.
I mean, one of them's got to be the worst, but it's going to be a different one for everyone who watches.
Right. Oh, okay. So here's the next topic of conversation, or possible topic of conversation. Mm-hmm. When we've been studying the original D&D, I was also thinking about that in the context of He-Man and He-Man's emergence.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, so we're talking about the late 70s, with the Dungeons and Dragons, right? And we found out that when we're talking about the original Dungeons and Dragons, that there's the fantasy element, of course, but it's also got this sci-fi element. That there's a lot of sci-fi elements to that as well, which you also see in He-Man.
Oh yeah, I love He-Man as a, because it's man. So He-Man by itself is science fantasy. That's what it is. It's easy to explain. It's easy to see. But as the saga progresses with Adam as the main character, so we have He-Man, which focuses on Eternia, and he is a part of the Eternian culture, and it's not really an exploration of different alien cultures. Everything's pretty well normal to him because he's a nobility, so he has experienced all of these different peoples coming to visit him, or all of these different cultures that he's probably held court with at some point. And so it's very science fantasy because it's focused on action, it's focused on the conflict. And there are fantasy elements like sorcery and magic, but there's also technology with the vehicles and the different structures that you'll see. Sometimes there's just random technological, like there's consoles that they'll use. They just kind of exist in the background. There they are. You don't know what they do, but it sort of gives that sort of sci-fi flavor to the show.
Right.
Then there's She-Ra, which is on Etheria. So we now have another planet that we're going to explore. However, it's still pretty well the same thing, but there's a wider world or a wider universe that's hinted at via the Horde and their constant conquering of these different planets. And it's, the Horde represents technology, and the Resistance, I think it's the Resistance. Maybe it's the Rebels and She-Ra, whichever it is, whatever R word. they're mostly magical. So it's this difference between magic and technology, science fiction versus fantasy, the light versus dark, good versus evil, all that's wrapped up in there. We now have expanded the universe to at least one new planet that we've seen, but we also know over here, sort of in the corner of our perception, is this idea that there are other planets out there that have been conquered by the Horde, so this universe is much broader. Then we do New Adventures of He-Man, which is like no one ever really pays it any mind. I love the New Adventures of He-Man. I think that it's definitely a product of its time. I think that it misses quite a lot, but it also hits quite a lot. But when we finally get to, so this is a He-Man he's shoved forward in time to a new planet, Primus, to a new culture, several new cultures that he doesn't really know how to handle. So it's this learning experience. He goes into these cultures and he has to learn about what is okay, what is not okay, what is taboo, what is not taboo. And so over the course of this saga of He-Man, we go from science fantasy to, I'll call it Sword and Planet adjacent, right? So Sword and Planet, like Barsoom, John Carter of Mars, it usually involves an Earthling exploring cosmos, exploring different planets, experiencing the different cultures. There's usually no morality plays. He-Man has morality plays. He-Man's also very toyetic. So there are these things that exist within He-Man that sort of push it out of the genre of Sword and Planet. But once we get to the New Adventures of He-Man, it is so close to being Sword and Planet. I just love watching the evolution of He-Man through these different genres, because it really, first of all, helps me understand what these two different genres are. Like, what is science fantasy? What is Sword and Planet? And then you can go from there and explore other things. But, taken as a whole, I think it fits snugly into Sword and Planet. I would say that it probably qualifies as Sword and Planet. There's some subversion, there's some differences that you could probably argue that it's not. It's more Sword and Planet adjacent. But I like fitting it into Sword and Planet. And so, like, I watch the original He-Man series as though it's Sword and Planet. And I love, because Marlena Glenn, Captain Glenn, she actually came from Earth. So even though He-Man himself isn't an Earthling, he is part Earthling. Even though he doesn't exist from the Earth culture, experiencing these new alien cultures in Eternia, he still has that element of Earthling alienness that I think it's enough to tip the scale. Let's
look at what Sword and Planet is.
Oh yeah, sure.
So, I mean, I found this. This may or may not be accurate, but I found this. So, the reason it got the name Sword and Planet comes from how characters typically use swords and other fantasy weapons when they need to fight something on another planet. Characteristics include the story takes place on an alien planet, usually a character traveling to another planet. Medieval fantasy concepts such as sword fighting knights or people, figures, and places based off different medieval myths. Some kind of adventure, mostly with the humans against a native alien race.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, kind of. So, like, I mean, it defies a lot of this. So Eternia is not an alien to Prince Adam. It is his native world. And so while he does encounter threats and mysteries, he's not an outsider discovering a new culture. And it's a lack of an outsider perspective that really kind of shuts the door on Sword and Planet, at least for He-Man. Now, Eternia does feel alien to the audience, and there is a little bit of an element of that, right? Like, the reason that the main character, how am I going to say this? It is simultaneously alien to the protagonist and the audience, because the protagonist is usually the audience insert. When we go exploring these, completely alien worlds with, just strange creatures, strange flora, strange fauna, and these different cultures that are likely nowhere near anything like an Earthling culture. So it technically, like, taken by itself, it doesn't qualify. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is science fantasy. But as it evolves over the course of She-Ra and the New Adventures of He-Man, it gets there, in my view. And I think that's neat, and I quite like that.
Jack Vance was an impact on D&D, obviously.
Oh, for sure.
Pig says, I bet He-Man too.
Well, we know Conan did. Let me see here. Appendix.
Well, Conan was an influence on both of them, because we see
Yes.
Conan being referenced in the original D&D, and then obviously Conan was also a major influence on the He-Man toy line. I mean, and then He-Man, in general.
Yes.
But that idea, like when we were talking about the original Dungeons and Dragons with all the fantasy elements, but there were also the science fiction elements. There were their transporter pads from this to that.
Oh yeah.
And, they even, like, I was surprised me that he was talking about that. Hey, you can do sci-fi with this. He didn't focus on it, but that's one of the first things that he said. And then had the different elements about going to different worlds and all of that, which is, which was present in that early He-Man stuff. I mean, it's obviously present in the Filmation as well. But when you've got the barbarian He-Man, the Green Goddess gives him his equipment. Some of that is science fiction in orientation. He talks about, I've got this great new vehicle with my warp drive, and a force field.
Yeah.
Right. He-Man and She-Ra did flip it, right? PHR Best said, yeah, He-Man and She-Ra operate on opposing dynamics. And He-Man, the focus is on defending a stable realm from enemies trying to conquer it. Right. She-Ra flipped that. An evil force has already taken over, and the story centers on a rebellion fighting to reclaim the world. Where do you have a place to go from there?
Well, let me see here. Let me consult my notes. Let's see here. I'm going to go back to
my favorite She-Ra episodes. I mean, when all you had to watch was She-Ra after He-Man was off the air. I watched She-Ra. And of course, it was when He-Man arrives. You got an episode, which was actually, I think, more of them than I remembered as a kid. He-Man shows up a bit more in She-Ra than I think I thought, but it was always special when, like, oh my God, it's She-Ra and He-Man is showing up. That He-Man's going to be in this one. Had to go run to the kitchen to tell my mom that was happening.
Mom.
He-Man's in this one. He-Man's in this one.
So let me see here. I have why He-Man matters. We did allegory of growing up, kind of. We did projection of aspirations.
It was also something that you could also, why He-Man matters. I mean, that's something also that you could leave children with.
Oh,
I mean, there were the dopey little lessons at the end of the show.
Yeah, there were the dopey lessons at the end of the show, but I think He-Man overall just was, I mean, they're moral plays, right? Like, it is good versus evil. It is light versus dark. It's using your power responsibly or diplomatically or non-violently in order to achieve the ends that you want. It's coming to a compromise. It's, joining two completely and totally at odds populations and sort of reconciling them to each other. It's very it's very moralistic in and of itself. And so, you have those silly little lessons at the end. Like, I can only think of one, and I don't want to bring it up because it's awful and weird, and it's a She-Ra one. And in fact, it might be the one at the end of Horde Prime Takes a Holiday, which is why it's so clear in my mind. But like just those little, share and share alike messages, or like the little, you used to get them at the end of G.I. Joe too.
The G.I. Joe had them as well. Yeah.
They were doing that because of legislation and parent outcry and whatnot, but really He-Man didn't need them, right? It was there as kind of padding, as a safeguard, but He-Man didn't need them. It was very much a story about good versus evil. It was, using your power responsibly. I'm just going to repeat myself because It's just so prevalent.
You could have read the subtext, which is not all that subtextual, and not needed the. That's interesting. I think I would like that. Would be interesting for what Doug to say. Yeah, I bet Doug would have some things to say about that. That's interesting. But yes, I wonder how naturally that came about and what those are like. Like, is that true that okay, He-Man's hero's journey versus is She-Ra fighting in the labyrinth? You know, She-Ra, Adora was taken. You know, the secret of the sword and that kind of stuff, and she
raised by the horde. Yep.
Yeah. So, that is probably there is probably something there, especially if you followed probably the secret of the sword. Made it like I think it's movie length, isn't it? Like, or I mean, it's or an hour or something. I don't know how long it is, but you know, longer than an episode. That arc that brings in She-Ra.
I remember it as a mini series, but that might have been the local station.
The Secret of the Sword, 1985 film, 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Wow, that's quite long.
Yeah, so that brings She-Ra in, and yes, and her origin is very different than He-Man. So yeah, I bet Doug would have something to say about that. How do we want to contrast what the TV show was with what happened in the movie?
Oh,
do you like the movie?
Well, I hate Gwildor. I've said that to you privately. I do not like the character Gwildor. I wanted desperately. He was the Orko stand-in in the movie. I wanted desperately there to be an actual Orko, and there wasn't. The movie has a very strong nostalgia factor for me. I liked Blade. I thought that Frank Langella will tell you that Skeletor is his favorite role of all time. If you ask him today, he will tell you that playing Skeletor was his favorite role to play ever of all time. And the movie, the filming of the movie was very fraught because there were budgetary concerns. Things were getting shut down. They had to do so many inventive things to get the props together. There's a lot of reasons why the movie kind of fails. It accidentally fails because the studio was working against Goddard at the time. Gary Goddard, the director. I don't know how much I like it. If I'm going to genuinely critique it, I love it. Okay. I love the movie, but as a kid, I remember quite vividly, my grandfather went to take me to it. And we sat there through the movie, and he didn't care if he liked it at all. He was just excited to be taking his grandson out to go see a movie. He wanted me to love it really well. And I did tell him that I liked it. But as an adult, I think it was a typical, it was just a typical Hollywood conversion where they don't really stick to the source material. They try to do something new. They throw the name on it, telling you that it's this thing that you have loved for the past several years, but it's not really actually that thing. It's even still, I have a hard time not liking it. It's like Dragon Slayer, I guess, right? It's not a good movie, but I love it.
I watched it a lot as a kid. I mean, I did have it. It came on. Was it HBO or Cinemax? I can't remember. But I remember there was because I went to see it in the theaters because I made that choice. So I did see it in the theaters. Young, and it's a violent film. I mean, for what, coming off of He-Man to it.
Yeah.
And then it was coming on either HBO or Cinemax. And I had an uncle who said it's coming on. Can you watch it? And we didn't have that. Whatever it was something we didn't have. Mm-hmm. So he taped it for me. So I had a tape of that movie, and it did get watched a lot. I mean, it got watched a lot. I loved Blade as well, like you're saying.
Yeah, Blade was rad. He was so rad.
Yeah, Blade was rad. Blade was the ultimate in cool. He was the new cool bad guy. Yeah. I mean, I wished I had a Blade figure at that time. I wanted a Blade. And that was when I was kind of getting out of getting a bunch of figures. Of course, I got both the He-Man and Skeletor. What is that? What line is that?
Motu Classics?
Yeah. For this reason, I had to get.
It's either Classics or Super 7. They're the only two that did those.
I guess Classics that brought this out. And so I had to get Skeletor because of Frank Langella. and he is, when you
What
watch,
I think I said Langella. I mess his name up.
What? No, I think I messed his name up too. So is it Langella or Langella?
The guy who played Skeletor.
Yes, because he was so great, I had to get this, and I would have loved to have had that as a kid. And that's another thing I would have loved to have as a kid. So obviously, I had to get the He-Man too. So I got Dolph Lundgren's He-Man over there as well.
Oh yeah,
would have loved. I mean, if I had those as a kid, I mean, it would have been all over. Those.
I remember waiting for figures to come out of Blade. And like we did get a Gwildor. I don't think we ever got a Dolph Lundgren He-Man, because why would they put another He-Man out?
I think there was a Gwildor. I didn't even realize that, but looking back at some of the toy lines, I'm like, okay, so there was like a Sarad release.
Yes, there was, and he had sparks that shot out of his mouth.
Yeah, and there was a
there may even have been a Blade, but I think this is like, I think we're now edging very close to the end of He-Man as a toy line.
Right.
And so they might have been like there were issues with distribution, issues with like manufacturer allotment and whatnot, because they were already employing these factories in making other toys, other lines.
So maybe This says that it's there. So like I would never have seen that. That says Blade Vintage 1986.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, 86. Okay, yeah.
And it's not all that great.
No, it's not.
But I still but yeah, that was edging to the end. Like I never got any of those. Oh, well, where was I going with this? Like with its different kind of feel and everything that it was. Yes, the movie didn't land, and there were a lot of they actually got shut down. Like
yes,
out of budget. You were actually the studio officials came on the set and were like, "You are done.
Yep, shut it down. You spent too much.
Close this right now. Clipboard in front of the camera. You are done right now with whatever this is." And so, yes, it could have been so more. And that was kind of like the decline of He-Man after that. I mean, it was, we ended up in the New Adventures soon after that and trying to do a complete reboot of He-Man. Let's see what is PH saying? PH says, by the power of Grayskull, I have the power. By the honor of Grayskull, I am She-Ra. She turns into herself. She doesn't have the power. She is herself. Meaning her power to be herself? Meaning her power is to be herself? Being yourself is the ultimate source of power? How do you interpret this? I had never thought about contrasting the He-Man and She-Ra words.
I think he's correct, and I think that it's the natural progression of He-Man's I have the power, because it's the declaration that you have the power is the power to, do what He-Man is, a power to, not the power over. And I think that She-Ra having that power to be herself, or, by the honor of Grayskull, I am She-Ra, it's a natural progression in that message of He-Man, because the idea in He-Man is that, you have that power. That's, kids across the world would echo He-Man sentiments. I have the power. And it was that power to be responsible, to be self-actualized. And when She-Ra acquires that power, she claims that power for herself, it's being herself. So it's an innate power. It's that power that you don't, it doesn't exist external to you, it exists within you. And so I think that it's a natural progression of the message that He-Man started, personally.
Okay.
I'm sure there are other ways to interpret it, but that's mine.
Making a link with I'll have to think about that more, because that actually is very also just the contrast of He-Man and She-Ra, Hero's Journey, Heroine's Labyrinth, possibly, but then contrasting their words. But then again, that's one of those things that how much was thought about, when they.
Oh, sure.
But then it's interesting if it is significant. Is that something that's underlying in archetype?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is that they were trying to make a catchphrase for a children's show to sell toys. But I think that, there's an emergent mythic quality, because that's where myth comes from, right? Myth exists in the collective unconscious. And so I think they just unknowingly, unwittingly tapped into these ideas. And there was likely conversation around it in the formation of these scripts and these words and these catchphrases and the toys and whatnot. But I think that there is something there that they tapped into. Maybe they didn't know what it was. Maybe they did, but it's there for sure.
But we got Conan, and we got basically a Conan type guy. How do you get more archetypical than that? Like what are we doing?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it's all sitting right there. I mean, because they weren't reaching deep when they made.
No, they got sued. They got sued for the comparison to Conan. Well, because I think the movie came to Mattel, and Mattel was like, "Yeah, sure, we'll consider doing the toy line." And then they bought the rights. I think sank. They didn't make the Conan toy line, and then they produced He-Man. So they bought the rights.
Something about that.
There was something like that. I can't remember. I wish James was here, the guy I work with on Saturdays, because he would absolutely know this stuff on the dime. But there was something like that happened.
Yeah, God, I wish I'd rewatched that because there was also I believe there was also some kind of issue that they had the toy rights or something, and then didn't realize it was going to be an R-rated film or something.
Oh yeah.
And then we're like, wait a minute, what are we doing? We're about to make toys for an R-rated film. I think there was something about that too. And then like, wait, what do we do? We got to make toys for something. But when I said they weren't reaching deep, I mean they didn't start off by creating this deep mythos for these characters.
I agree.
It's the archetypical level that they are doing. Oh, Retro's here.
Hey,
Retro and I talked about the movie specifically. We talked a little bit about the cartoon too, but Retro and I have an episode where we went deep into the movie specifically.
Yeah.
So Titterpig for $20 says, seems rather Taoist. The yang is what goes out to change the world, to defend what is behind from harm, to create safety. It allows the yin to come into its own and focus on growth itself and also the next generation. These archetypes are ingrained in the Jungian unconscious and will out when a writer is digging for ideas without much context. I wish I had thought more about the contrast of He-Man and She-Ra for this discussion.
Me too,
actually. I wasn't thinking about She-Ra, but maybe we.
Yeah, well, I thought about She-Ra and the New Adventures to kind of put it in the context of the genre progression, but I didn't really juxtapose the two at all with regard to messaging or theming or anything like that.
Well, we have tried to bring I was going to bring something current up because it just by chance I said, hey, let's do He-Man, but then I was seeing some stuff about He-Man in the news. So let's take a look at that because we went through the Netflix He-Man, which was actually just before I started the live stream. So I didn't live stream anything on the Netflix He-Man. For good, for ill, whatever you think about it. But I was like, so now we've got something else. And so here is just one possible article or whatever. Our version is quite different. New He-Man actor teases Masters of the Universe reboot.
It's your He-Man. It's the Battle Armor He-Man.
That is Battle Armor He-Man right there. And I'll tell you that, of course, I loved that because that was my He-Man. But I did really want a He-Man that looked like He-Man from the cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
And he was, I got one of those in that big tin I was talking about.
Yeah.
So I got one of those, except for he didn't have all of his gear and his hand was broken off. Ugh. And I was like, how can I have this as He-Man when like he doesn't have all the stuff and his hand is broken?
And so I used it. That would have taken some doing because they didn't have wrist joints. So someone really had to work that to get it off.
Yeah. So I used him as Faker. So I was like, I'm going to have to use this guy as Faker instead.
Good solution.
But I would have loved to have. Galitzine? Nicholas Galitzine? I don't know. I'm sorry. I probably mispronounced that. The actor who will portray He-Man in Amazon's upcoming Masters of the Universe reboot. Man, we got Amazon again here. I don't know how much interest. Are we thinking this is going to be great or not? All right. So we have an Amazon reboot.
I am like, here's the thing, right? I love He-Man. I really want to, against my better judgment, give it a chance because what if they get it right this time? This could be the time that they get it right and they nail it. Well, but look, everyone's got a track record, and looking at the Amazon track record, it's not.
Well,
not
I
great.
know, and that's like that was the attitude. I said, hey, I'm going to go do that when I watched Rings of Power, like we talked about, House of the Dragon, and then also the Spirit, kind of that I went into War of the Rohirrim. Hey, all right, I'm just going to go see it. Like maybe they did a fantastic job. I'm just going to see it. I'm not going to make an opinion until after I see it. I'll just go in cold and see it. I kind of did. No. I did the reverse of that. I did the absolute opposite of that with Netflix's He-Man, because I was sitting here working before I was live streaming. I was sitting here working the computer a lot, and I was like, "Oh my God, He-Man's coming." Okay, I either have to completely get off the internet, or just completely embrace all of the rumors and spoilers and things like that. So in that one, I just went all in on anybody who was talking about a spoiler or rumor about whatever was coming out. So I did the opposite on that one. But he says, okay, so spoke recently about how the live action adaptation will differ from the original. Galitzine also spoke about his hopes for the upcoming film and the franchise's legacy. Masters of the Universe will be directed by Travis Knight and is set for release on June 5, 2016. So actually not that far away. 2026, not 16.
I know
2026. Oh, no. This is only 2025. I got my years messed up. So it's still a while away. So this is still a while away.
Well, it's about, a year and a half.
Year and a half away, right.
Which makes sense, right? If they're starting filming, if they've wrapped pre-production, they're started filming, then this is about that, I would think. Depending on how many locations, blah, blah, blah. I just, like, here's my worry, right? Going back to what Sable said, that these archetypes are ingrained in the Jungian unconscious and will out when a writer is digging for ideas without much context. That is true and correct. And the issue that I find with most modern retellings is that so when you tap into a Jungian, to the Jungian tradition, the Jungian idea of myth or the archetypes, what you're doing is you're tapping into something that you share in common as just a human being innately with a wide variety. Like every human being from every culture has these in common. We all know what the hero is. We all know what the shadow is. We all know what the anima or the animus is, because these are innate to our unconscious, the collective unconscious, as Jung would say. And so what's happening in modern storytelling is that they're trying to sort of like distill these characters down through a conscious lens. And it's corrupting the mythic nature of the characters. That's why Rings of Power isn't working, because they're trying to put these characters in a different context from their conscious storytelling that is just, it's not compatible with the unconscious archetype, the mythicism. It's just not compatible with the mythic nature of the stories. And He-Man does very much have a mythic nature through a Jungian lens. Lord of the Rings has a mythic nature through the Jungian lens. And when you get a hold of those and you say, well, I can tell a better story because I'm going to make this character have these particular character flaws or foibles, it ends up not working. It just doesn't work, because you are effectively shattering the myth in favor of a very temporal, very consciously driven idea that's not as resonant. You're not going to pick up as many people with these ideas because they're not a part of their collective unconscious. They are these and the conscious storyteller is influenced by a wide variety of things. Their upbringing, the culture that they came up with. And none of these things are bad. We get tons and tons of stories that aren't myths, that are well realized and excellent and just really remarkable pieces of literature or cinema or video games, whatever they are. But when your drive is to take something like Lord of the Rings and He-Man and bring it down to that level, you really are making it suffer for that reason. That you're extracting a lot of what people who originally came to them to loved them for. And that's my view. And so anytime anyone is ever going to sit there and tell me, oh, well, we do He-Man, but completely differently, it's like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Are you putting it in a modern context? Are you giving He-Man character flaws? Because that's not He-Man. He's something to be aspired to. He doesn't have to have flaws. We'll never get there. But he has to be there so that we can attempt to close the gap in any way that we're able to. And it's just, so that's my take. It's sort of a shotgun blast of a thought process. Perfect distillation. It's subverting the timeless to the modern. Sable Phoenix encapsulated it perfectly in a sense. That's absolutely what I'm trying to say right there.
It's subverting the archetypical to the cultural.
It's
subverting the timelessness to the modern.
Yes. Absolutely. So my concern, right, is that they're going to extract that mythicism and that universality and that mythic resonance in favor of some kind of modern tropiness that is going to end up making it temporal and just, it's going to be very cultural instead of cross-cultural. It's going to be very temporal instead of timeless, and it's going to end up, it'll appeal to who it appeals to, which is fine, but you're not going to find a broader audience. You're not going to make some sort of, masterpiece or resonating television series or movie or piece of literature that will follow people throughout time because of how ingrained in that mythicism and unconsciousness that it is, right? Like Nosferatu. We just had that conversation. Nosferatu, it echoes throughout. It's over 100 years old, right? And it's been told and retold because of how archetypal and how mythical the story is. Depending on the era in which it's viewed, Orlok can represent a wide variety of different contemporary issues. But because in the film he's distilled down to death and plague and shadow, you can read those into virtually any temporal issue. And unfortunately, what they're doing with modern cinema is putting the temporal issue front and center instead of allowing people to extract the mythic and apply it themselves to whatever it is that's affecting them in their current day and time.
That's a very deep analysis on that subject. Yes, that cuts more than just He-Man, right? So what?
Oh, yes, more than just He-Man for sure.
When I was looking at this, I'll bring this up here again. What I was looking at, the Masters of the Universe movie. Here's what I only read this like right before we started on screen, so I haven't even. But the Master of the Universe movie will follow Prince Adam after his spaceship crashes to Earth, separating him from his magical power sword that links him to his homeland of Eternia.
Who cares?
Why would you do that?
Yeah, who cares?
I mean, I am like, no, like it seems like the main lesson to be taken from the He-Man movie is that you don't send them to Earth. Like, that's such a weird thing to do because, I mean, we understand why they went to Earth for budgetary reasons and all these other things that are going on. It's like, hey, it'd be really easy if we can just step into the, backyard down the street and shoot this rather than trying to create an Eternia set. But, I don't understand. I mean, like I said, maybe this will be fantastic. Maybe it will. I'm sure I'll go watch it. Maybe it will. Maybe. But when I read that, I'm like, that is the main thing people always talk about when they talk about the, things that went wrong with the He-Man movie in the 80s. Is that like people go to the He-Man movie and also other franchises. I mean, they go to that movie to see that thing. And so when you don't provide that thing, it's not, how hard is it to provide that thing? I don't understand, like, knowing that it's like the screaming lesson from that movie, how you could possibly sit down in a setting to brainstorm what this movie is going to be. It's like, hey, let's bring Prince Adam to Earth and have him lose the power sword.
Like, you
what? Like, that seems so weird. Like,
I don't care. I don't
but
care.
like that's not what I want to see when I go and see He-Man. Decades later, when he goes back to his home planet to defend it from evil Skeletor, he must first go on a journey to become He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. I don't understand why you would do that.
I'm not a big fan of the origin story in film. I think that it's a time waster. I don't care how Spider-Man became Spider-Man. That's a bad example because it's actually really important. But even, I don't know, man. I don't know. Let's like in a 2-hour movie, 1 hour and a half or 2 hour movie. Does it matter how Spider-Man became Spider-Man? Probably not, right? Like it doesn't matter how He-Man becomes He-Man. And when you think of He-Man, the first thing you think is, I have the power. And the second thing you think is that power sword. So
yeah,
how is taking that away from him? It's just, it sounds like a disaster. I'm less optimistic.
Yeah, I know. I mean, arguably, we have too many origin stories. I'm not against the origin story, like but it seems like we got to reboot because there's there's such an archetypical hero's story, the hero's journey to this.
Yes.
One of the issues with it is that we have probably too many of them today, origin stories, because every time you reboot something, we're going to reboot, which things happen all the time, you end up with an origin story again. And you're going to retell that in some way or another. Like, I'm not against like an idea, like let's take Nolan's Batman, where, okay, if you come in knowing you're going to tell 3 films, let's say that was the case, and you say, okay, so I'm going to tell Batman. I'm not just going to tell 3 Batman episodes when he's Batman at full strength. I'm going to show Batman creation movie 1. I'm going to show Batman in his prime in 2, and then I'm going to show Batman exiting the scene, and going toward retirement in 3. I mean, that's a reasonable thing to do, to me, that idea, but yeah, I mean, so it does sound like this is something like an origin story. I mean, I think actually a He-Man origin story could be cool. They did tell that. You did see some of that in the cartoons, getting the power sword and something like that. So if you were committed to a series of films or a TV show or something like that, and we're going to actually start with Prince Adam getting with this. That's not necessarily a problem, but we're all over the place today. So yeah, Retro says they messed up already. We want to hang out in Eternia. I wanted to see some Shadow Beasts. Titter Pig Rancher says that's right. We go to science fiction and fantasy to escape our humdrum world, not be forced back.
Yeah. It's escapism.
It's escapism, and it's so it sucks when you're like back in you got He-Man and at the fast food restaurant.
Getting back to the origin story, I don't know if I need it. Like, I don't know if anyone needs it in a He-Man film, right? He-Man's backstory was the opening in every episode, right? I'm Prince Adam of Eternia, defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Gringer. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held off my magic sword and said, by the power of Grayskull, I have the power. Cringer becomes Battle Cat. There are 3 other people who know this secret. That's it. That's the origin. Let's jump into the action. I don't know if we need some sort of arduous quest for him to get the sword or reveal, the sorceress revealing herself to him. We've actually already gotten that, right? Like we got it in 2000X. I don't know how much of that we got in the new Netflix series. I didn't really watch the new Netflix series, but like we've gotten that before. I don't think it wasn't. And I don't hate the origin story. I just dislike the way it's used most of the time. It's largely unnecessary. Could it be done in a way that shocks and surprises me and makes me really, really enjoy it? I'm sure, yes. Someone out there with an idea could absolutely nail it and impress this nameless, faceless idiot on the internet. But just largely, I don't need the origin stories.
Well, I mean, I would agree with Robert saying Batman Begins. He says definitely nails the origin with the League of Shadows.
I would say
that remains one of my favorite origin stories. Yeah.
And for as much smack as I talk on Nolan, he got that very right. He got that very, very right. with the
Yeah,
League of Shadows.
that movie he got very right, which was early on, which is one of the reasons because that movie and then also the first Daniel Craig James Bond came out at the same time, which is kind of an origin story of James Bond. It's not exactly, but he's becoming James Bond at the beginning of that. So it is early on. I don't think I would call it an origin story, but like it went exactly because during the movie he is James Bond, but in the beginning scene he's getting his credentials to be the 00 agent. And I still remember that era of film with being so optimistic because I had loved both of those movies, and everything they had done. And okay, there is going to be this refresh. We're going back. Here we go. And now we're going forward again. I remember so much optimism with those two movies. So why do we need? So I guess we could kind of close, or if we have other things to talk about, we can. But I would say, okay, so in today's world, though, if we want, why not return to He-Man as it was? Is that something that's needed in today's world, and that we're just not getting?
Yeah, I think it's desperately needed in today's world. It would be a return to it. It's like comic book superheroes, the American comic book superhero, right? He-Man very much has the hallmark of the thumbprint of the American comic book superhero. They are something to aspire to, right? We don't need to see them at their low points when they're gritty, except for maybe Batman, but like as an archetype, Batman represents the shadow anyway, right? Like if Superman is the hero, Batman is the shadow. And so he's a little bit of a corner case. But with regard to He-Man and taking power, like he doesn't just have the power innately. It's a sword. It's an object. He has to reach out and grab it. So he has to choose to get there. There's a choice involved. Then he has to speak the words. And then he has to exercise the power that he's given with responsibility and resoluteness and fairness and morality and compromise. Like it's an incredibly important lesson for children, but also adults. Like this lesson doesn't stop being relevant over the course of your life. You're going to go through so many different crossroads. You're going to go from a child to a teen, from a teen to a young adult, from a young adult to a married young adult, from a married young adult to a middle-aged individual, from middle-aged to and every time you cross one of these thresholds, it's a very intense, very emotional thing. There is melancholy that comes up. There's excitement that comes up. There are reasons for you to be reminded of exercising the power that you have, first of all, being capable of self-actualizing. Second of all, actually exercising that self-actualization in a moral, good, reasonable, responsible way. I think that He-Man is extremely timeless with regard to this messaging. And I think that it is very relevant to today's modern world where, there's not really a whole lot of personal accountability being taken. Like ultimately, the message of He-Man is personal accountability. And I think that it's very, very relevant to any world, but particularly this one that we live in.
The Titter Pig Rancher for $10 says I always found it intriguing that this hyper masculine hero is given absolute power in the form of a sword. He never actually uses that tool for the purpose it's designed for, as you mentioned.
Yep.
But that was something that was probably the writers would have, but that was something that was impressed from regulators, that he can't actually ever hit something with the sword.
Well, and also I looked it up. You were right. One of the issues in that lawsuit, in the Conan He-Man lawsuit, was that Mattel didn't realize what they were agreeing to. It was far too violent. And this was likely an answer to the violence in Conan. They said, well, we offloaded this because we didn't want the violence. So we can use a sword, but, let's make sure that He-Man is, responsible and diplomatic.
Well, he always he never hits Merman with the sword.
No.
It's always like a judo throw. Like he does a lot of judo moves to fling people into mud pits and things like that. He's the gentle giant, the ability to cause mass destruction, but the mark of his heroism is to solve problems without resorting to that destruction.
Yes.
Yes, and and they call that, and that's one of the reasons why you have the robots, like we're talking about Skeletor's robots. That's often called out. I'm thinking of one of the episodes with a major battle in it early on was the Curse of the Spellstone. And in that one, you really get to see He-Man and his allies, including Battlecad, go to work on Skeletor's robots. Skeletor sends in the robots, and there's one of the larger fights where they go through them. But then He-Man does hit things with swords. Battlecat claws them open, and they fall apart. But it's all robotic, and they will even call this out. The one with the meteor, the guy with the cosmic comet, cosmic comet was another one where they fight something, these giants, but it's called out that, oh, you mean these guys are more like robots, that they're not something, they're meteor parts, and then they fight them. That got even worse in She-Ra. Now that's one thing that got worse in She-Ra, is that they were constantly calling out the sea serpents.
Yes.
These sea serpents aren't sea serpents. They're robots that look like sea serpents and sea monsters. And so that was I think a bigger thing, even more with She-Ra, that because she was a woman, that we can't show this violence. And so it was always very clear that whatever they're fighting is not human.
Well, I think that also sort of plays into the technology versus magic dichotomy in that particular show, right? So the fact that the enemies were constantly robots in She-Ra specifically, maybe not such a big deal, but there's definitely a premise that is promised when you give the most powerful man in the universe a sword, right? Like, you expect him to hit things with the sword, but He-Man very rarely does. And then to great effect, he very rarely does.
To great effect. So what would you have done in the movie then? Because clearly when we cross the line into the movie, and okay, now we are into a 1980s action movie. We introduced to two elements of He-Man that action movie people are going to want to see. First of all, he's got a big sword following Conan. So he kills people with the sword, Skeletor's guys. I mean, we're going to be hitting things with the sword. And then also he uses a gun, or guns, plural. He uses a rifle, and he's got the pistol next to him, and he shoots people too. Can you make that jump?
Can you make the jump to an 80s action movie? Probably not.
Well,
like, it's an 80s action movie. Someone's got to die, right? Also, there's a difference between an episodic story and a singular film. And there are some expectations within film with regard to, like, Chekhov's gun, right? You can't show the gun, or Chekhov's, He-Man's sword, we'll call it. You can't show He-Man with a sword and have him not kill someone with it by the end of the movie. That's really not satisfying. For some reason, though, the show can get away with that. But not even, like, there's a reason. There's an out-of-universe reason for him not to kill anyone, right? It's a kid's show. Parents groups are going to go absolutely nuts if we have this butch, masculine, huge buff guy slicing everything into ribbons. Can't do that. But at the same time, in universe, it really ends up being a profound decision. It's profound for He-Man's power to come from the sword, but for him to use it so extremely sparingly. I think that it's a very, I don't know, man, now thinking about this, I feel like I'm, like, so underprepared for this conversation, because this isn't something that I really kind of dove into with regard to my notes. Like, I think that there's a lot of conversation to be had around this.
Yeah, I mean, probably there is. We should probably just talk about She-Ra in general, and then use that as an opportunity to talk about the contrast between He-Man and She-Ra. But I guess I think that you could, I guess, that could make the transition from the cartoon to the movie He-Man. But I because I guess what I'm asking is like, is it essential to the He-Man character that he not kill things? Or is it possible? If can he still be He-Man even if he does? And I'm thinking that he could, because in a more adult story, that could you still get across the message of He-Man and still accept that he is a warrior on this planet that is fighting evil creatures.
I
And kills
agree
things.
with you. I think that you can absolutely do that with robots. I'm kidding.
With robots.
I think that
it's not exactly, Skeletor's guards in the movie, you see a lot of sparks. You don't see blood. So, I mean, even arguably there, you'd be like,
yeah.
So there's that.
I think that you can do it. I see what you're saying. I think that it can be done, but there really has to be, I think that the message in this particular story would really have to lay heavy on the responsibility of wielding that power correctly. And sometimes that responsibility is correctly expressed as protecting people. And sometimes you will be made to step up and protect someone from just an absolutely relentless force of violence that you cannot shunt, you have to smite. So I think that it could certainly be done, but you would really have to pay very close attention to the way that you communicate this message and what you lay heavy on and what you kind of back off on. But I think that He-Man can still be He-Man under those circumstances. It's just going to be, you might have to tell the story in an extremely like ham-fisted kind of way.
Well, now it actually makes me wonder now that I brought that up. It's like, well, what if you had the challenge that you're going to tell a live action movie? I guess I don't know what they're doing here, but you're going to tell a live action movie, but you're going to retain that restriction that he's not ever going to do that. Could you still could you do the opposite? Could you still bring satisfaction to an adult level audience, even if he never kills anyone? And I actually think you could probably do that too. I think probably so. Also tell that story. And there are some ways that you can get through that with the technology and things like that, because clearly you could have He-Man get out the sword and have a big sword fight. Blade leaps down. Okay, so what does He-Man do? Pulls out. He's not going to cut Blade's head off at the end of it, but you could have a great sword fight with He-Man and Blade. You can have somebody shooting at He-Man, and he uses the power sword like the lightsaber to deflect all, and he goes into battle with it, and then, he's deflecting it. And of course, they're like freeze rays or something that are like freezing the other side. So now, that's actually an interesting writing challenge on both sides. I actually come to think of it.
It'd be an interesting exercise to sit down and write these.
Telling He-Man in a way where you accept killing and death as part of it while still maintaining the message of He-Man, or also telling a satisfying adult story where He-Man retains that non-violent kind of, it's not passive, but whatever, hesitance to kill things, right?
Responsibility, diplomacy. Yeah, I know what you mean. That thing.
Titterpig says, He-Man teaches the true masculine values of knowing that you have certain kinds of power, but knowing how to use that power judiciously.
Yeah, I think that's actually from a train of comments that he made. It's like two above.
Oh, yeah, I think it probably is. I think that answers my original question, though. He-Man resonates because he is profound, because he doesn't use power in its expected ways. He has power and restraint. So very few protagonists we see in action-oriented media, especially looking like young Arnold Schwarzenegger, actually do that.
Again, agree.
He-Man teaches the true masculine values of knowing how to have a certain kind of power, but knowing how to use that power judiciously. Now, I mean, that makes me actually think that, okay, actually, I would like to explore trying to write an adult story that is set on Eternia.
I mean, maybe he can't kill, or maybe he shouldn't kill. Maybe part of being He-Man is not killing, right? maybe that is a part of the fabric of his profundity.
Yeah, Retro Nerd Girl says this is also the conversation I hear often for Batman and Superman. Superheroes don't kill, or do they?
That's it's a very interesting conversation. I think it's a very psychological conversation. I think that it's a very mature conversation, though, right? Like, you have to be able to entertain specific ideas for the sake of the discussion, while recognizing that these are things that maybe you don't necessarily believe in or agree with. But could Batman kill? Can Batman kill? He used to shoot people, right? When he first appeared, he had guns. He brought guns with him. Now he doesn't. I think that's largely due to the influence of the animated series and the Hardak episodes, which are some of my favorite of the animated series, where there's a supercomputer that makes a copy of Batman, and he is completely undefeatable. He is just an invincible robot made of whatever kind of metal, and just completely undefeatable. And then the way that Batman defeats it is by presenting this crisis of morality. Batman gets the robot to believe that it actually killed Bruce Wayne. They're fighting. He goes over a cliff, and he hides himself under the cliff eave so that the robot thinks that he killed him, and it short circuits, and it blows up, because that crisis of morality it undoes him, because Batman, quote unquote, doesn't kill people. But he has before in the past. He definitely has in the Nolan movies. He has miniguns on the front of his Batmobile. He shoots everyone.
Well, yeah.
He guns so many people down in that movie.
Well, yeah. Well, and even the Michael Keaton Batman, and whatever, and that he clearly kills people there too. Yeah, I have to think about it. I would have to. Yeah, if somebody came to me and said, "Okay, do He-Man," how do you? Yeah, I would have to think about that quite a bit. About, okay, what kind of fundamentals are we? Well, what kind of fundamentals do we have that make people love this, that are going to, because that could be a tipping point. I mean, so what kind of story are you talking about? And who is this audience too? Are you talking about this is a movie for 40-year-old guys who saw He-Man, or are you trying to make this for 9-year-olds today, or 7-year-olds?
I think you're making it for both, right? Because He-Man's cross-generational. He-Man it's inherited. I see fathers bring their sons into the toy store on Saturdays to buy He-Man toys. Oh, this is what I used to collect when I was a kid. And, and there's an interest that's been passed on there. So I think that, if you are making it for the fathers, you're making it for their sons. And I think that it's a very easy thing to keep He-Man from killing anyone in the context of a film that's made for general audiences or all audiences.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I believe that would probably be the answer too. From the marketing perspective, I think you would start with, okay, what are we trying to do with this movie? We're trying to make a movie that every 40-year-old guy will want to take his son, niece, nephew, daughter, whoever was in that age range with them to the movie, like you were talking about with your grandfather and seeing that movie.
Yeah.
So I think that would have to be the audience that you would choose, and then. Yes. Yeah. So then not do the 1980s action movie version of He-Man.
Yes. Let's not do that He-Man again. It was good for its time. It's a memorable film. I do genuinely love it. I don't think we need another one of that particular He-Man. Mm-hmm. I also don't think we need a friggin' Prince Adam on Earth being separated from his power
sounds like we don't need that either. It sounds like we don't need that. I would love one day. It would be so expensive to do, but maybe, who knows, with like the AI tech or something like that, something could be realized. But I would love to do a He-Man transformation sequence.
Oh, yeah.
In my own, approach to this, because I would do it like as a scrawny Prince Adam. I mean, it would be like, if it was live action, he's gonna be dressed in the pink of Prince Adam, have that kind of like look to him and stuff like that. But I want him to run in like looking like the scrawny, like 8-year-old, like you do when you're 8-year-olds and you're an 8-year-old guy or 9-year-old guy or something like that. I mean, maybe 10, whatever, but young guy, just in the cartoon, Prince Adam and He-Man look a lot alike. And of course they do in the toys as well, because they're based on the same mold.
Yeah, it's the same toy.
I would love to see a transformation that just completely and utterly played up the difference physically between Prince Adam and He-Man, in order to just like, this is not the Superman puts on some glasses, and now nobody knows it. Like, let's just go all in on this like scrawny, maybe 11, I don't know what it 12 preteen kid, who runs in like noodle arms, because he got whatever. Oh my God, and like Skeletor is attacking, or and something shooting, something outside the palace wall, and he's like, and then have it Cringer be like a kitten, like play that up too, that like it's this like little green kitten that he's holding in too, and then he's got to go and get the sword. Don't have it on his back, because obviously he wouldn't be able to hide it on his back. But he goes and gets it out of his room, like from under his bed or something, and is like, we have got to, and then have the little teeny tiny kitten upset in the corner and whatever, and then just play up his transformation into a massive, loincloth wearing giant guy, and then the little kitten into Battle Cat, and then have them ride off at the end. I mean, that would be awesome.
That would be very awesome.
Yeah, I meant, and I think I said this when I was talking with you, Retro, and I meant to say it when we passed Lingala, when we were talking about that. There are cuts of just the Skeletor parts of that movie that are on YouTube, and I will actually watch them for inspiration, because I love it. I mean, if you watch only the Skeletor sections of that movie, you would think this is one of the greatest movies of all time.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
he's so great. Yeah, and I think I said this line when I was talking to Retro. The movie did not live up to Skeletor. If that movie had lived up to Skeletor, Skeletor would be up there with Darth Vader as one of our great sci-fi fantasy villains, because of what Frank Langella did with him. I love every moment. That's my favorite part of that film. I love every moment that Skeletor is on that film. That is an awesome.
I agree. And he has this perpetual sneer, the whole, like, in every frame, he's just got this maliciousness. He wants it to kill everyone. He wants power for power's sake. It's just, he's really good in that role.
And probably that's what, like I said, when I liked the earlier cartoons that are they're less comedic with Skeletor.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the movie does a less comedic Skeletor, a non-comedic Skeletor.
Yes.
A Shakespearean Skeletor, which is like, who thought of, I mean, obviously it works, but like coming off of, especially the late cartoons with this comedic Skeletor guy, like, no, wait a minute. We're going to make him a serious villain, and he's going to have like Shakespearean lines that he's quoting and stuff like that. This ultimate megalomaniac. I love it so much.
Like, especially because in the later episodes, he's busy calling everyone like a nincompoop or a boob. He loved to use the word boob. Everyone is a boob in that show at some point or another. Just to go to Shakespeare with it is that's a jump, but it worked, man.
It completely worked.
It really worked. I think my favorite Skeletor line of all time is when he's using his staff I think he's twirling it around to do something. And Beastman goes, I didn't know it could do that. And Skeletor's response is, I could write a book about what you don't know. And like, whoa, like totally unnecessary. It's so funny.
There's also,
I love Skeletor. I love Skeletor.
The clips, there's that one. Yeah, I could write a book about what you don't know. But then also, like, when they're flying someplace and in whatever their vehicle is, and he like turns and Beastman like slides into or something. He's like, Beastman, put your seatbelt on.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
No, that's what I know.
In my head.
When I think about great
Skeletor.
Skeletor lines, I am not in a giving vein this day. He torches this person. And I also love the evil in the look that, like, when he's getting into it, when he's got the power coming from the cosmic gate, behind him and stuff like that. And he's, I feel the power. I am more than life. I am a god.
Mm-hmm.
It cuts to evil in. He's like, looks at she gives him this look that's like, oh my god, here he goes again. Like,
oh,
the
great.
last thing this guy really needed. Like,
yeah.
And I do love that. I do love
that. It's so good.
Well, is there anything else we need to cover here, or have we done He-Man? We've actually discovered some things that we need to think about. So She-Ra, we ended up with another topic to put on She-Ra at some other time, to handle these things. Is that really from Shakespeare, Richard III? I didn't know that.
So it's like actual Shakespeare. It's not even
I didn't know
it was actual Shakespeare. That's very funny.
I am not in a giving vein today. It's vain, V-E-I-N. That's what I thought. Is a line from Richard III. So it's actually Shakespearean Skeletor. I didn't know that. Thank you,
amazing.
Retro.
That's
amazing.
I
am not in the giving vein today. Richard III by William Shakespeare. Ha! It's actually Shakespearean Skeletor.
That's crazy.
I did not know that.
I think another one of my favorite Skeletor lines is from there's a holiday special. I am not kind, I am not nice, and I am not wonderful.
Yeah, yes, that I was going to say that one too. I hope that my nephews have seen the holiday special, because that was also one of the things that we watched. Christmas. That was one of the Christmas specials that was on tape. The He-Man Christmas special was there, and I didn't watch it this year, but I have watched it in the past. But yes, I am not nice.
Well,
all right,
as you do.
Well, I guess that about wraps it. Everybody go and subscribe to Better with Bacon's channel. I'll put the link down here. This was a great conversation as always. I've got to do some more scheduling here, because we have some also more serious topics to cover, including Beowulf, which is coming soon. We haven't scheduled that, but we're going to do Beowulf. Better with Bacon. And I need some, and I'm going to invite some other guests on as well, because we've gone into like some of the classics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, things like that. I've been looking for people to talk about them. And Brianna also has a topic she wants to talk about. She has been writing romance, and she wants to talk about the structure of romance. She has some ideas about the structure of romance, so that could happen. That perhaps as early as next week. So we have a Brianna topic that Doug will be on. We'll be talking about the structure of romance soon. So if that's something that you want to tune in for, well, please subscribe if you're just finding us, and we'll be doing that soon. All right, everybody. Everybody have a wonderful evening. I'll be live tomorrow. We'll be talking about Cthulhu Mythos, OSR, old school gaming. Old School Gaming and the Cthulhu Mythos tomorrow on the Heath's Geekverse channel, different channel from here. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. I got a lot to share. I've got a lot of interesting things to say about that. I've been writing stuff for that, so I'm going to share that with everybody. Very excited. So, all right, everybody, thank you so much for being here. We have the power.
We do.
I will see you in the morning on Heath's Geekverse. Later, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.